Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We will start this high-level discussion with two of the most important speakers of this forum, Robert and Leo. You heard from them yesterday. They had presentations through the course of yesterday. Dr. Rud Venhoven had a more traditional type of panel presentation, but he will not join us. We will break the barrier here, and we will go beyond the normal type of format. We will switch it to a type of conversation. Of course, it's a rigorous type of conversation, but a more dynamic one, a fresher one, if you will, and a provocative one. We want to generate provocation. This will be in English, so all those that need simultaneous interpretation, please feel free to ask for your equipment, your translation.
So we're going to talk in English, this conversation with these two big panelists that are today with us in this forum. They don't need presentation. Leo Bormans is considers himself as the ambassador of happiness. I asked him where Happy Land was, so we can know where he comes from, or what government, or what land, or what territory he represents. And Robert is also a panelist, a conferencist, international figure that will talk about all these issues on positive psychology, happiness, and subjective well-being. He also Leo is from Belgium, and Robert is from the US, from Oregon, and we're very pleased to have them and to have this conversation so that all the discussion may have a more concrete and a more useful meaning after all these sessions. So let's start. Why don't we're gonna organize our conversation around 5 realms or areas of discussion. First, around the individual, the person, the citizen, the consumer, one of each of us. Then we're going to talk about the family, then about the school, then around the job, the labor, the workplace, and finally, in a more aggregate terms, around society. So first, I would like to ask Robert if he thinks there is something more important than happiness to discuss around in terms of development. Robert.
Is there something more important than happiness? Yes, there is. I think happiness is unquestionably a high good. I think it is widely desired. I think that it feels good, it's pleasant. I think that it's ensconced in meaning, and I think that it's beneficial for individuals, for families, and for societies. As such, it must be among the highest goods. But I think that it shares space with other important outcomes, other important states. And I would hold out the very nature of our being. When we preference happiness, we're essentially saying the final authority rests with the individual. Happiness is itself a very individualistic notion. We often talk about the individual feeling good, the individual having a subjective sense of satisfaction or meaning in life. And I think that it often misses the more collective understanding. Humans are primates. We're social animals. We don't exist alone. We have to partner with one another. We have to connect to one another. So I think that trust is equally important as happiness is. Yes, I'm going to talk more into the microphone. I think that trust is equally important. Anything that fosters connection between people, I think is Bruno mentioned this morning, I think he said fidelity or loyalty, solidarity. All these social dimensions, I think, are of equal stature as happiness is for the individual.
Leo, as an ambassador.
Yes. They asked me to write a book on happiness, and I decided to make the book on happiness. So the World Book of Happiness. You have to be ambitious in your life to become happy. So when I was at the London School of Economics, Richard Layard said, "You're an ambassador. You have the words. Go and tell the world." So I'm telling the world and spreading the news. But we are all ambassadors of happiness. Everybody of you is an ambassador of happiness. What does an ambassador do? He represents the thing and he connects people around him to represent it, to spread the news. We are all ambassadors of happiness in one way or another. And sometimes I'm introduced to the ambassador of Japan, ambassador of Italy, and then they say, he's the ambassador of happiness, and no one starts laughing. They think it's serious, but of course it's a joke. And there's nothing wrong with telling jokes. It's a virtual reality of happiness. And you always meet people who have criticism on happiness. When you tell the word happiness, there's something, well, the world is not a happy world. You don't know about reality. You're a naive dreamer. You're stupid or something. You will all meet, every one of you will meet this criticism, this pessimism, and you have to fight with that. That's what it is about. And when we're talking about introducing happiness in policy and in schools, you always meet this criticism. But there are more optimists in the world than pessimists, but the pessimists make more noise. Why don't we starting the optimists making more noise?
Good. Well, what about the individual? I mean, what do you think a complete individual, a complete person should be integrated of? What would be your thought more as a persuader, as a conferencist, as a panelist, rather just than an academic that you are also too?
Me?
Any?
I spend a lot of time thinking about sort of what the optimal state of happiness for the individual is. As a psychologist, my training is in clinical psychology before I became a social psychology researcher, so I was interested in treating depression and marital problems and in thinking about how happy should a good marriage be, how happy should an individual be. And I think the answer is not perfectly happy. I think two of the mistakes lay people make is thinking that when a person aspires to be happy, she should be perfectly happy, she should be intensely happy, or that she should be happy all the time. And I strenuously disagree with that notion. I want to live in a society where people have the capacity to feel guilt. I want to feel a sense of loss and grieving after the loss of a loved one. I want to be angry at injustice. And in some ways I admire the people who are protesting. I don't know much about the local issue, but I like the fact that anger can move people to action. So I'm not trying to get rid of anger, not trying to get rid of guilt or sadness. Sometimes they can be problematic, but if I had to give a guideline or a rule of thumb, I would argue maybe 80%, 20%. I mean, that's not a hard threshold, but I think people should experience about 80% happiness. You should feel good about 80% of the time, but 20% of the time, as life happens, you should be able to respond appropriately to it.
Yeah, we were
That's a good. I always tell that they ask me, "Are you the happiest person in the world?" Luckily, I'm not. I'm not. Of course, I'm not driving the car full of balloons. It's not about smileys. It is about pain. It's about sorrow. It's about doubt. And when you open the hearts of people everywhere, they have their pain, their sorrows, their doubts, their anger. Of course, it's there. We're not talking about happy, happy, happy dancing on the table every day. I don't like that song. I don't like the image of that. There is this imperfectness of life. Life is imperfect. And when you once can live with the imperfectness of life, that makes it a bit easier to become happy. Perfectionists, that's very difficult to become happy. Some people make mistakes, some things go wrong, and we have to give a place to the negative emotions as well. There is not only the positive emotion, but the positive emotion can be very, very strong. But anxiety is the worst predictor to become happy. So don't be anxious, be open. And that's something you can learn your kids, you can learn your family to be open, to be curious, to be reflective on your life. And there is an economical reason to become happy, because happy people live longer. They're more successful in school, in education, in sports, in politics. There's no reason not to invest in happiness of people. In the London School of Economics, I did some research showing that people who felt happy when they were 15 years old, and they followed them 15 years long, and when they were 30, those who felt happy when they were 15 earned 10% more than the average. But those who didn't feel happy when they were 15 earned 20% less than the average. That means there is a gap of 30% after 15 years, even in economical returns. So investment in happiness is not only something for the happy hour at Friday night or something like that, it's something basic of schooling, of individual life, of jobs. It's not the side effect, it's the core business.
I think, do you mind if I comment on that? I think it's interesting because if we're talking about the individual, it has to be that it's teachable in some way, I think, to the individual.
That's the good news.
Yeah. So I'm curious, because I think we probably differ in how we would teach it. So I'm curious about what you would do to teach it.
I'm working for the government in Belgium. I'm working there for 25 years now in the Ministry of Education on positive education, positive journalism. That does exist, you know, positive journalism. That means that most of the journalism is very negative, focusing on the conflicts and the problems. But there is some kind of positive journalism. I'm a chief editor of a series of magazines with a circulation of 1 million copies a month, a television program on positive education. And you cannot teach children to say, be positive. That doesn't work like that. But you can create an environment in which people can be curious, can be open-minded, can lose their anxiety, can discover the world. Parents often decide, oh, wow, don't do that, don't do that. There is danger everywhere. The happiest kids in the world are living in the Netherlands. The Netherlands are famous for their bikes. Kids are biking. Kids of 10, 12 years old take the bike, drive 12 kilometers on their own. And they're trusted by their parents. Yes, you can. We trust you. There is some hope. And they mostly do that together with other kids. So there is this connection. When happiness is about connecting, about the competence that, yes, I can, and about the challenge you can set, the goal you can set. So you can learn this. In schools, you can learn that, not competition. Competition is a very bad thing. Competition makes jealousy. Ambition is the good thing. That means that you grow, you set your own goals and you improve, but not because the other one is better. No, because you want to improve yourself. So this is what schooling can be about.
Yeah, no, that's what I was curious to see if you were going to mention sort of capabilities or conditions. I think as a psychologist, I would want to teach social and emotional skills specifically to children. And the one that I find the most powerful is, it has a terrible psychological title, but emotion differentiation. So if you think about the ability to label your emotions as existing on a continuum, and on one side of the continuum, you get people who just say, I feel good, I feel bad. They're not very articulate. And then in the middle, most people can label one emotion. I feel angry, I feel sad. And it turns out that that's not all that helpful either. But there are these people on the other side of the spectrum who are very good at articulating their emotions. They can say, I feel a little bit guilty, but also irritated and frustrated. And when people can start doing this, when they can start unpacking their emotional experience and labeling it, they're less aggressive. Even for people who have personalities that are more prone to anger, they act out less aggressively than people who are not prone to anger. This cures phobias. You can cure spider phobia this way. If you say, look at that spider, I'm disgusted by it, I'm afraid of it, but I'm curious about it. Those people actually can tolerate their negative emotional states better. Managers fare better at work when they can do this. They are seen as stronger leaders. And this is a skill that's completely teachable. In one school in Long Island, New York, they taught 900 kids this skill. The kids' grades went up, conflict resolution skills went up. So I definitely think that some of these what's called soft skills, but I think of as happiness skills are possible.
If you talk to psychotherapists all over the world, they say, well, the people in my cabinet have the problem to talk about their emotion. They don't find the words for their emotion. But you can learn that when you're a kid. So we are spreading, for instance, children's stories in Belgium, learning to talk about emotions. It's a broad spectrum of emotions, not only anger or something like this. It's a broad spectrum of emotions. And you can teach that. You can really learn that. Telling stories to children and going into a dialogue. The stories always end with questions. The parent asks at the kid and said, well, who are your friends? And how did you learn to know them? And what are you doing together? But the kid should ask the question as well to the parent. Who are your friends? Where did you meet him? Do you sometimes trust them or distrust them? This is the dialogue you can give to people to find words for their emotion. And people often ask me, why do we have to educate our children to be happy? And now we still have to educate them to be happy? Why? Well, they are educated every day by Disney Channel, by everything on television, by movies, by computer games. They are educated. We cannot say they're not educated. They learn the role models from what they see on television. And these are the bad models, mostly the bad models. You don't want to live like a film star or like the first lady of some president, I don't know, but you don't want to live like that. So why? But these are the role models they always see. Kanye West with proving his love by a ring of $1 million. That's the lesson they get every day. But there are other priorities, and parents can show these priorities. Teachers can show that. Happy kids in happy schools, in happy families. What's wrong with that?
Going back to the family, many of the studies and reports in Mexico tell us that family is perhaps the most important unit, the support, the network of happiness, of well-being. What about other places? What about other latitudes? What do you think about family?
There are two pieces of research that I've done in my career that I feel quite proud of, if that's not too awful to say. I don't mean that in an arrogant way. One of them was with homeless people living in Kolkata, India, and they're desperately poor people. They suffer harassment from the police. They often don't have food. They have really no secure income whatsoever. And when I went to them, I asked them, how satisfied are you with your life? How frequently do you feel anger or worry, anxiety? And then I compared them to a comparable sample in California, homeless men and women living on the streets in Fresno. And interestingly, the people in Fresno have better access to dental care, health care, blankets, food from free programs, shelters. And the people in Calcutta were significantly happier than the people in Fresno, California, despite the fact that they had much worse objective material conditions. And I don't mean to romanticize the lives of the people living in Calcutta. They had awful, awful lives, and they had a lot of complaints. But the thing that seemed to buffer them against the most dire effects of poverty was the fact that they tended to be homeless in relationships, intact with their whole family units. They were in contact with their families. They had their wives with them. They had their kids with them. They were worried about their kids, to be sure, but they had their kids, and they experienced daily joys. Their kids played football. They prayed. They did puja. They had kind of intact sort of enjoyments and loves and a full life. Whereas the people in California, they hadn't talked to their kids in years. They felt ostracized by society. They had no contact with their children. They're divorced. They didn't have intact families. So I think that this is like the fundamental building block of your society. The more intact your family is, absolutely the better.
It probably is the identity of the Mexicans, and don't lose that. You're doing better in happiness than the Americans. Why do you always want to cross the border to buy a new iPad there? I don't understand that. Because that's not where happiness is to be found. It is in your own identity. And talking to people all over here, I was invited at a birthday party some days ago in Monterey. And they said, well, we'll have a small birthday party. But there were 50 people around, and they were having a drink and beer and food for a whole day. I've never seen that in Belgium happening there. I said, you always find a reason to be happy. No, they said, we don't need a reason. We party without a reason. So this is part of the identity. Don't lose that. There are other things you can fight. Corruption is something you can fight, but don't lose the identity. But the strong thing is that when I asked Mexicans, they firstly tell the family is important and the network. We always know someone. When we don't have money, we know someone who has money. We find someone. There is always someone you can count on. The danger is that you restrict these limits to this family, to this network, and that you don't take part in community life, in volunteer work, in something that's bigger than the own network. Because when we're talking about politics, politics is not for the politicians. Politics is for the people, parents, for children, for people in school, at work. This is democracy. It's not politicians we will wait for. It's the ordinary life. This is politics. Doing volunteer work, thinking about democracy, twittering around that you don't agree with what's going on in the country. This is what politics is about, and you do that in the family. But when I can give one advice, broaden this. Don't stick to the family and the own network. Broaden it to the community, to higher levels of connection.
Yeah, actually, we were talking about in the coffee break about politics. In Mexico, still a word perhaps only constricted for politicians, and we should reivindicate the term and do politics in every sphere. But more than politics, I would say public affairs, and be worried about the community. And that's another thing very particular, another feature very important in Latin America, that we trust family, we value family, we value a lot of close friends, but then comes the other, the unknown person, the colleague who is not that trusted, who is not that close, who is not that valuable. And then what about, again, going back to school or maybe to the workplace? How is happiness and well-being, how does it work in those other realms where you don't choose your colleagues, where you just meet with them?
For the World Book of Happiness and El Libro Mundial de la Felicidad, I asked 100 professors in 50 countries to summarize in 1,000 words what we know about happiness. And the first one I contacted was Christopher Peterson. He is died now, but he is one of the founding fathers of positive psychology. And I asked him, can you summarize in 1,000 words what we know about happiness? And he mailed me back and he said, are you stupid? I've written all these articles and 2 or 3 books, and you want me to summarize it in 1,000 words? That I can't do that. And some weeks later, I got a new mail from him and he said, well, your question has triggered me. And I started scratching, and I thought, in how many words can I summarize what we know about happiness? And I succeeded in summarizing it in 2 words. Yes, you want to know these 2 words now? There's one reason you have to buy the book, of course. No, I tell you. But when I tell you, you will say, well, I knew that already, but now you don't know yet. These 2 words are, and that's a summary of what all we know about happiness. This is other people. It's not about me, it's about the other. It's not about things, it's about people. It is not my things, it's other people. But you're always someone else's other. I cannot surprise myself. I have to surprise someone else. So you are always the responsible for someone else's happiness as well. Happiness is fundamentally about sharing happiness. It's born as a twin.
I think that's an interesting point. There's actually some relatively new research showing that when people value happiness as a personal goal, it runs counter to their own happiness. So people who place a high premium on happiness end up being less happy, they end up enjoying activities less, they end up feeling more isolated and lonely, which isn't to say that that we shouldn't somehow seek happiness. Happiness is a wonderful byproduct. When you work hard, when you find meaning, when you do these things, you end up being happy and getting all the benefits of happiness. But sometimes placing too much of a premium on happiness itself as a goal can be dangerous, and I think this is actually a nice thing. When you start talking about other people, altruism, spending money on others, reliably pays back happiness dividends. So when I start thinking about me being responsible for your happiness and you're responsible for my happiness, we can kind of sidestep that trap, and we have this co-responsibility for happiness. And I think that's in the workplace, that's in every
Yeah,
sphere.
when we're talking about schools and jobs, we know that internally motivated people have better results. When you want to do things, not because you have to do things, you do your homework, you learn your lessons because you want. But the problem is, how do you make people want? How do you make people internally motivated? And what we learned in positive psychology is this self-determination theory, that the most important thing is the self-determination, the steering of your own life. You become an agent of your own life. I cannot be your agent, you live your own life. And there are three components in this self-determination theory, and this is the success of why computer games are successful. This is the reason. Lots of parents tell me, well, everything is okay, but my kid always plays these computer games. How can I help him? Well, we can learn something from the computer games, because this self-determination theory is perfectly the reason why computer games are so successful. The three basic pillars of self-determination are autonomy, competence, and connection. Autonomy is versus control. People who feel controlled all the minutes of their life, whether they're students, whether they're kids, whether they're workers in a factory, don't feel happy but are less productive as well. So autonomy is a very, very strong power in self-determination. Competence is very important, feeling that someone says, yes, you can, that you can use your abilities, your skills, that you're encouraged to grow. And the third thing is connection. We are social animals, like Robert says. We need each other, and we perform better when we are in teamwork instead of competition all the time. So these three elements are also the basic elements of computer game success. You can play it on your own, it's completely autonomous. You get from level to level, you don't have to do the same exercise 12 times again. It is you have reached a level and you go to another level. That's your competence. You get immediately a reward for that. And you feel connected with all the other players in the world, with the whole system of that game. So don't forbid computer games. Learn the lesson that you can use this in education, in schools, in jobs, to focus on autonomy, competence, and connection. And that makes people self-determining their life, agents of their own life, whether they're students or workers in a factory.
Yeah, actually, many reports in Mexico tell that people that have a job and independence, even though the income is low, the salary is not enough, they are happier than those who are facing uncertainty, who are looking for something who hasn't found yet. So, yeah, definitely these are features important to take into account.
Can I tell just a quick story about that? I don't want to use all our time, but it'll be like 3 minutes. Okay. So this just is... I'm very interested in people who work in very sort of low-status jobs, but who find a lot of meaning from them. So I spend a lot of time interviewing my taxi drivers, my bus drivers, people I come in contact with. And about 3 years ago, my best friend, who lives in Taiwan, he fell and had a very bad head injury. He was in a coma for 2 weeks, and so I flew to Taiwan to go visit him, and I had to hire a caregiver. And I was doing these interviews for a woman to come to the hospital and take care of Michael. And I said, I'll be at the hospital 8 in the morning to 8 at night, and I want you to be here from 8 at night to 8 in the morning, the other 12 hours. And this woman I was interviewing, her name was Lynn, she said to me, no. And I thought that was a weird thing for a job applicant to say. Like, why would she say no? She doesn't want that. And I said, well, how much time do you want? And she said, I want 24-hour shifts. And I said, well, how many of those do you want? She said, I want 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I don't know what the labor laws are like in Taiwan, but I know in the United States you could not do that. I said, you can't do that. I think that's impossible. She said, let me tell you something. I've been inside this hospital for 700 days working 24-hour shifts. I haven't left. I haven't walked outside this hospital in 2 years. And so suddenly I thought, forget the job interview. I'm a psychologist. I want to interview you. And I asked her, why on earth would you do this? Because I know you don't make very good money. And she said, I can do what no one else in the hospital does. The doctors and the nurses, they have lots of expertise. They provide expertise. They can heal the patient. But they're too busy to have any compassion for the patient. That's what the family is for. The family has nothing but compassion, so much compassion, but the family is too close to the patient. The family has too much compassion, and when the family sees their loved one with a bad head injury, something like this, can't function properly, it's too painful for the family. And I'm somewhere in between, and I can offer what the family can't and what the doctors are too busy to. I offer dignity. I do this because dignity is the gift I have. I'll never just feed a patient. I'll teach the patient to feed herself. And she said that, like, that's what makes me tick. That's why I'm willing to spend 700 days inside this hospital. And of course, I hired her immediately because I think that these stories are not actually uncommon. They're very, very common.
Well, I meet businesses all over in the world who make now their core business happy workers. Happy clients and happy workers, a happy business. And it's not stupid. There are big firms. You meet them as well, Robert. These kind of firms that have decided that not only the money and the monies will be the more important. We're moving from a money economy to a satisfaction economy. Maybe it will be not more and more money, but maybe a bit slower, a bit less, but a bit happier. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because these firms that are focusing on happy workers and happy clients are more productive in the end as well. They are loyal clients, they come back, they make less mistake, there is less job leave, there is less sick leave, there's nothing wrong with that setting as a goal. And we really see these countries emerging now everywhere, they exist. If you can answer these 4 questions in a positive way, you're working in a happy job. These are the 4 questions. 1. Can I be who I am? This is about diversity and respect. 2, can I become who I want to become? Not what the boss wants, but what I want to become. This is about growth and development. Can I cooperate with other people, or do I only have to compete with them? Cooperation. And the 4th thing is, is my job meaningful? Does it belong to something bigger than this one thing I have to do? If you can answer 4 times yes, this is what is a happy firm and a happy job.
Yeah, actually, when we were designing this forum, we realized that there were many experiences, interesting cases of corporations, enterprises, firms, and so on, discussing these issues. From the big ones, Google, that has a recreative area, yoga classes for free.
But there are small ones as well.
And the small ones in Guadalajara here, or in other parts of Latin America, trying to improve productivity through this kind of discussion. So
last week I was in a corporation and they sent the complaint manager home. Because they had a complaint manager, but his task was to get complaints. But he was working to get the complaints, but otherwise he was fired. So he was encouraged to find the complaints. They have changed it, and they have now a happiness coach. And it works 2 times better, because he's talking not about complaints, but how can we improve life?
Would it be possible to imagine that in the resource management area, there will be psychologists and therapists and persuasive people like you trying to coach the guys, the workers, the people?
He does.
Yeah.
It's his job.
I definitely think it's possible because I do it. One of the programs that I really like working with, I mentioned Ruby Receptionist, this virtual call center yesterday. If you went there physically, it's a room about this size with cubicles, 100 women, mostly women, answering the phone, just one phone call after another, 2 minutes each time.
When you visit a call center like that, I call it hell, but you changed hell to heaven.
Yeah, and you think it would be an awful place, but it's a very satisfied place, a very happy place, and one of the policies they have that I like the most, if you work there for 5 years, they give you, on top of your normal vacation, 5 weeks of paid vacation, $1,000 in cash, and 3 coaching sessions with me to help you to like plan. And these people, they take a trip to Europe, they go on a cruise around the world, they learn Italian, they just do all these amazing projects that they would never otherwise have the opportunity to do. And when I went and asked the leadership, why are you willing to do this? Because this is not going to necessarily affect your bottom line. It will probably affect your retention, but it's not going to probably make you more profit significantly, except for turnover costs. And some people will quit afterwards. They'll quit. They'll do their 5 weeks, and then they'll quit the day after they come back. And she said, because we're not just all about profit. We make plenty of profit, and on top of that, we want to invest in our people and make better people. And if they go work somewhere else, we've still helped society because there's still a better person working somewhere
And
else.
sometimes it can be just fun as well. Last month I was in a corporation and they had a game. They had a bird sing and then they played hide and seek for 5 minutes. Everybody had to hide and seek in the building. And it was just these 5 minutes of complete fun. And then they went back to work. Nothing wrong with that.
Well, actually, there is.
I know.
Before we all go and just play tag and ride bikes around the office and just juggle and it's like so fun all the time and we'll have a beer. Sometime work has to get done too. I recognize that. And
it only works when the leader is convinced, of course, when leadership is important, and this is the strong thing in companies, of course.
But it can't just be happiness all the time, I think, is the danger.
That's true.
And in fact, in a recent study of firehouses where there's first responders for emergencies, the ones that had this happiness-only mentality, they measured the outcomes. They were more likely to get to the fire on time. They were also more likely to get in a car accident on the way to a fire. They were also more likely to get hurt while they were at the fire because they just had this kind of like loose, this is kind of fun mentality. And sometimes they have to just be a little bit careful too. So you don't necessarily want your power plant to be like the funnest place in the world or your control tower at your airport. You want people a little bit worried about things.
The same for perfectionism.
Yeah.
We talked about perfectionism as a strong predictor of being unhappy, but sometimes you have to be a perfectionist. But it doesn't work when you're a perfectionist in all the domains of your life. If you do that for the children, for your relationship, your friends, for your leisure time, there are certain domains in which require perfectionism. But perfectionism is when you can limit it to the moments you really need it, then this is about the balance, of course.
Let me introduce a situation, a condition very typical of the Latin American region: inequality. We're talking about when you talk about Brussels or Belgium or the boys in Netherlands or the people in Portland, I see a more equal society. More or less, they are all together. They are more or less the same. They are even, but not in Mexico, not in other countries like us. We see contrast, and not from one city to another, but within the same city. And that is, for some analysts, what is really pulling apart our society, what is really creating frustration, creating envy, creating non-positive or negative affects and feelings.
We see that from all the happiness research that countries in which there is less inequality, they are happier. Equality creates happiness. And if we are doing this kind of conferences just for the happy few, things are wrong. We should not restrict happiness for the happy few, for the middle class or something like that. This is a strong task for everybody of us, because also the rich are happier in an equal society. So we need this knowledge that this happiness is not for the happy few. But how to reduce this? This is our goal to set for the next years.
In the practical day, how do you solve or how do you overcome or face this kind of situation?
In terms of inequality?
The daily life.
Yeah, well, I think there are several kinds of inequality. We're talking about income inequality. I think gender inequality is actually worth mentioning as well. And in some ways, I think gender inequality is an easier problem to solve because it is just so artificial. I mean, we just created it out of nothing, just start taking away attitudes against women, and you're going to have gender equality. You're going to have a harder time changing income equality because you do find changes in entrepreneurialism, sort of tax structures. Some people work harder than others. So even if you redistributed wealth today completely equally, in 1 month from now, it's going to be redistributed unequally. But that is not necessarily true with gender equality. So I just want to put a plug in for gender equality real quickly. But I do think that the government has a real opportunity with regards to income inequality in terms of things like tax policy, environmental policy,
The northern
job
countries,
creation.
the northern European countries like Denmark, Sweden, who are the happiest countries, they pay more taxes than we do, but they like it because they don't like it, but they don't dislike it because the system is transparent. It's based on trust. If I give something to the state, I trust the state that it will come back for some kind of social equality. So this is the thing you have to work on a transparent system. I like to pay money to help people to get something back as good schooling, good health care. I like to pay it, but I don't want my money to disappear in some big castle or something like that.
Just like in Mexico, but I don't know what happens here. Yeah. I think Professor Helliwell has a question. Maybe we can open it a little bit. If you can come to the front, please join us with this conversation. And if you can bring
It's a comment that I thought someone else was going to say, but I had to say 2 things about inequality. One is the most important inequality is not of income, but of happiness. And so that is what makes other people unhappy. But the second is, I thought of a wonderful way in which you can address inequality now, yourselves, where you live. And if you look on the website of Susan Andrews' site in Brazil, you'll see a reference to it. What they have done in their particular applications of gross national happiness, she starts in the most unequal communities, and she has them meet and greet and connect in ways we've heard about, and it changes the lives of all the people, because you connect people who otherwise would never even met each other and were in fear of each other. You could imagine in the barrios what these situations must be like, and turns those communities around by mobilizing them as teams, whether it's cleaning up a stream or whatever. The ultimate goal and output is to connect these people and make them happier, and what disappears in the middle? The inequality.
Great. Thank you very much. Inequality, happiness.
Yeah. When I see the faces of all these people, I think I found 500 colleagues now. We are all ambassadors of happiness.
They've taken your job.
That's great. Let's join it.
We should give them certificates or something like that.
Yes, great. Or a hug.
No, but it's a new, more refreshed perspective to discuss inequality of happiness. We talk about inequality normally in income terms, gender as well, and other realms, other aspects and dimensions of life, but definitely there is also happiness inequality, and I think that's a very particular thing in countries like us. We were discussing just before entering here with regard of our colleagues here that were demonstrating yesterday, and I think it was a good expression in a sad moment of Mexico where there are missing people, where there are certain social turmoil, and I think it reflects precisely the way the country's thinking, is feeling, is reacting. And I think that kind of expressions are welcome, and we have been saying the same in Twitter, that all these criticism are also welcome, because this is a very particular, very unique theme, discussing in a very challenging moment of Mexico.
Yeah,
so
I told yesterday I don't like that song, Don't Worry, Be Happy. I made buttons saying, do worry, be happy. And this is what we are going to do. Do worry, but that doesn't mean that we cannot be happy.
Yeah, please, want to add?
It's fine.
Well, let's move to the last aspect of society. We have been talking about it. I don't know if you want to just to start wrapping up.
Yeah, I'd like to present sort of a case study that I find is interesting from a place that I conducted research. So I mentioned that I looked at these very, very poor people live in desperate poverty in Calcutta, and then their counterparts on the streets in California. But there's sort of a group that's in the middle that I left out, and I think that they're an interesting group. There's a homeless community in Portland, which is my city, called Dignity Village. And what the homeless people did is they got together and they said, you know, it should not be a crime to be homeless. Many of us have problems, some mental health problems, some physical health problems. And what we want to do is we want to show you that we can create our own community. And they found materials, just pieces of wood or tents, and they built houses, and they built a community garden, and they grew their own vegetables, and they installed wind power and solar power. And they built a community building, and they created their own autonomous government, and every Wednesday night they have a council meeting, and they work out any kind of issues, and they all volunteer. You have to volunteer to fix bicycles or to provide security. And they essentially created a functioning community. Now, they still have many problems, many mental health problems that prevent them from being top performers or from getting long-term employment, you know, but when you look at them compared to their counterparts in Fresno, California, they're significantly happier. And when you look at what predicts their happiness, it is public trust, social connectedness. These seem to be the magic elements, this two-word answer of other people.
Well, when you're working in society, the main aim is to create active citizens. What is active citizenship? It's based on the pillars of challenge. You have to challenge people to become an active citizen. No one wants that. It doesn't fall from heaven. You have to challenge people to connect people, to use their competence. These are the elements that leads to active citizenship. But the context differs. What works with these gardens doesn't work in another country. So you have to consider the context of your country and find the strengths of people, the identity of people, connect people, setting goals. Hope is something you can foster as well. Hope is a strong power. It's not about something elusive, some dream. It's about setting goals, finding pathways to realize your goals, different pathways, connecting people to go for their goal and to challenge them to realize their goals, to become agents of our own life and also of our own community, of our own country.
Yeah, we are like skeptical about this kind of recommendations or formulas or things prefabricated, but I have to ask you, because some of the people in the audience ask me, what would be your advice, your final thought, your recommendation of how to address, how to deal with all this discussion that is really provoking, is moving consciousness, is moving people, thoughts, is really creating a new discussion in this country? What would be your final thought in this kind of discussion and dialogue?
Never believe someone who could say something in 30 seconds.
Excellent. Beautiful conclusions. Never.
I'll try and sum up in 32 seconds. I think there's a place for government to create policy, but I mean, look at me. I have long hair. I'm practically a communist. I'm a leftist. I think that it's got to come from the people, and I think that this bottom-up support, I mean, I think all the government is a reflection of the people, ideally. And I think that you can't just have this top-down government policy where we're just going to measure the people and fix the people and improve the people. I do think the government plays a vital role in helping provide security and material opportunity for the citizenry. I think that that's there. But ultimately, the citizenry is the government. And I think that when we start seeing them as two different entities, or when they are two different entities, there's a problem that needs addressing.
Public trust.
Well, what? Yeah, give him the applause. We are carrying out huge research on positive interventions. What can you do to change reality for people in their ordinary life, in social life? And we see there is an effect. Since the 5 years I've been studying happiness now, the great things I'm learning is that the importance of easy things, optimism, hope, love, they are so basic things. They're very universal, very human. But the good news is that you can learn to be more happy, to be more optimistic, to be more hopeful. The scales and measuring, well, I don't care about measuring, but it just proves that you can improve things, that this is the good news. And the other thing I learned is that people differ. All people are different. What works for me does not work for you. We are all different. But the good thing is that we all are changeable. We are changing each other every day. So it is very basic. It's not very, very difficult. When I've been speaking to more than 50,000 people the 2 past years, and most people tell me, well, what you tell us is, I recognize this. How does it come that I recognize this? Well, there is a reason. We are talking about science. This is science. This is not a guru or some naive idea or some balloon. This is science. It's psychology, economics, sociology. And what does science do? It researches human being. And we are all human beings. So we recognize this kind of thing. The great thing is that the human being has the possibility to create imagination. Imagination is the thing that makes a difference between animals and people. So we can create things, we can go for a dream, we can imagine a situation that is not this situation, but is somewhere else. We can imagine that. And we can find pathways to go to that. That's the great power we have. So let's use it instead of focusing on the differences. I'm not a Mexican, yes, but what's the difference? So let's focus on what we share. And what we share is a great dream. And let's go for that dream, finding pathways, each of us in his ordinary life.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much for the conversation. An applause to everyone.